This is the solutions video to your review sheet on equations and inequalities. As always, be sure that you use a grading pen and you fix every problem that you missed on your review sheet. Number 1, the perimeter of a rectangle is 30 inches. We're going to write and solve an equation to find the value of x. So we're going to begin by labeling the sides that we don't know, and then we can use that to set up an entire expression for the first half of the equation. So I'm going to have 2x plus 3 plus x plus 2x plus 3 plus x, and altogether that needs to equal 30. I'm going to begin by combining like terms. So 2x plus x plus 2x plus x, that will all combine to be 6x, and 3 plus 3 is 6. And then I can bring down the other half of my equation. And now it's just a two-step equation, so you can subtract 6 from each side, and you'll have 6x equals 24. And assuming you don't run out of room like I did, you're going to divide both sides by 6 to get x equals 4. For part A, it's just asking for a value of x. It's not really in the context of the problem. So an answer of x equals 4 would be enough. You wouldn't need units yet. Okay, moving on to part B, we need the length of each side of the rectangle. It does give you a reminder to include units. That won't be there on the test, so just get in the habit of doing that. The short sides, or the width of each rectangle, is just the same as the value for x. So each of those are going to be 4 inches. So I have 2 of those. And then the other 2 sides, I need to multiply 2 times 4 and then add 3. So that will give me a final side length of 11. And then we'll have 2 of those. Okay, so 2 sides that are 4 inches and 2 sides that are each 11 inches. Okay, next we're going to solve and graph some inequalities. The first one is just a simple 2 steps. We're going to start by subtracting 14 on each side. So here's your 0 pair, and we'll have 2x is greater than negative 6, and then we'll divide by 2 to get x is greater than negative 3. And then we can label negative 3. Actually, let's move that over. So negative 4, negative 3. And then this is greater than, so I'm going to use open circle, and all the numbers that are bigger than negative 3 are on the right. So this is what your graph of the first one would look like. Okay, next I'm going to subtract 4 from each side. So that's your 0 pair. We'll have 3 is less than or equal to negative 3 times x. And then I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient. So I'm going to divide by negative 3 tenths. So this will simplify down to 1, and I'll just have 1x. The left-hand side, I'm going to do 3 divided by 3 tenths. So that's the same as 30 divided by 3. Positive divided by a negative is negative, and since I divided by a negative, I have to flip my inequality sign. Sometimes it's easier to do your graph if your variable is first, so I'm going to rewrite and when I do that, I'm going to have x is less than or equal to negative 10. So I can start negative 12, negative 11, negative 10, negative 9, negative 8. And this time I'm going to have a closed circle at negative 10. And my arrow is going to point to all the numbers that are smaller than negative 10. So that's going to go off to the left. Okay, next, Jonathan is deciding between 2 different rental car companies. The first one has a $20 rental fee with 50 cents per mile. The next is a $15 rental fee with 75 cents per mile. And we're going to try to find the break-even point, or the place where it's the same exact cost at both companies. First, we're going to define our variable, and that's going to be our number of miles. So we can use whatever letter. I'm going to use M, and that's going to represent number of miles. And now that I've got that set up, I can do an expression for each company. So the first company is $20 plus 50 cents per mile. And the second company is $15 plus 75 cents per mile. And to find the break-even point, I'm just going to put an equal sign in between, and that'll be my equation. Then for part C, we're going to show how to solve that. Okay, first step in solving this is to get the variables combined. I want to have a positive coefficient, so I'm going to subtract 5/10 m from each side. So this is my zero pair, and on the left-hand side, I'll just have 20. Bring down the equal sign. And 75 cents minus 50 cents is 25 cents. Okay, now I'm going to combine the constants. So I'll subtract 15 from each side and end up with 5 equals 25 cents times m. And final step is to divide by the coefficient. So we're going to divide by 25 hundredths. That is also the same thing as multiplying by 4. And so I'm going to end up with 20 equals m. Remember that m represented the number of miles. So I'm going to include my units, which would be 20 miles. So if I'm going to drive more than 20 miles, then I'm probably going to want to use the car that charges less per mile. If I'm going to drive less than 20 miles, then I would want to go with the second company. Okay, next, another geometry example. The perimeter of the triangle is 3 times as large as the perimeter of the rectangle. It asks what x represents, and looking at my picture, x is going to represent the height of the rectangle. All right, now that I know what I'm solving for, we need an equation that represents this situation. So it says the perimeter of the triangle, we'll do that in blue. We can write it as x plus 8 plus 14 plus 3x. Okay, keyword is, that's going to be our equal sign. And the last piece, 3 times as large as the rectangle. So I'm going to do 3 times the perimeter of the rectangle, which when simplified would be 2x plus 4. So this is the equation that I'm going to be solving. I can go ahead and combine like terms when I start solving. So 8 plus 14 would be 22. 3x plus x is 4x. And then I'm going to distribute. 3 groups of 2x is 6x. 3 groups of 4 is positive 12. So this is the equation I'm going to solve. And we can subtract 4x from each side. So 22 equals 2x plus 12. And subtract 12 from each side. And we'll get 10 equals 2x, which gives us a final value of 5 for x. Okay, so this side length is going to be 5 centimeters. Lastly, I need to find the perimeter of each figure. So if I substitute in 5 for each of these, I can go ahead and do that. And starting with my rectangle, if I have 2 plus 5 plus 2 plus 5, that's going to be a total of 14 centimeters. And as always, make sure you include your units. We'll also label that as the rectangle. And then your triangle, we're going to have 5 plus 8 plus 14 plus 3 times 5. And when you simplify all of that, you will end up with a perimeter of 42 centimeters. And we'll label that one as the triangle. Okay, next up, we're just going to start solving some equations. We're going to need the distributive property. So the first one, I'm going to do 3.5 times 4. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus half of 4 would be 14. So 14h. Negative 3.5 times 3. We can just multiply that out. It's going to be 10.5. So minus 10 and 5/10 equals 26h plus 1.5. Let's combine the variables first, so I can subtract 14h from each side. And that's going to give a 0 pair. Be sure to bring down the negative in front of 10.5. So we'll have negative 10.5 equals 12h plus 1.5. And now I can deal with the constant and subtract 1.5 from each side. So that's a 0 pair. Left side is going to be negative 12. And then final step is divide both sides by 12. So negative 1 equals h. And then as always, it's a good idea to check your answer to be sure that you've got the right solution. On part B, we're also going to start with distribution. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side. Negative 5 times m is negative 5m. Negative 5 times negative 2 is positive 10. And then I'm going to bring down the plus 3 equals negative 12. Then I'm going to combine like terms. So this will become negative 12 equals negative 5m plus 13. And then subtract 13 from each side. And then be sure when you divide by the coefficient that you include the negative. And so you're going to divide both sides by negative 5, which will give you positive 5 as your final value for m. Again, go back and check it, especially on a test. That'll tell you whether you've got the right answer or not. Moving on, part C, we will distribute the negative 3. So negative 3y. Negative 3 times negative 7 is positive 21. And then that all equals 5. Just like we did before, we're going to combine like terms. Negative 3y and negative 4 is negative 7y. And positive 21 and positive 5 is positive 26. And then we can get rid of the constant by subtracting on each side. 21, actually, sorry, that should have been 26, ahead of myself. Negative 26 plus positive 5 is going to be negative 21. And then we're going to divide by negative 7 on each side to get positive 3 equals y. And on part D, we're going to do the same thing with some fractions. So 2/3 times 6c minus 2/3 times negative 12. This first part would be 12 over 3, or 12/3, which is 4c. Negative 2/3 times negative 12 would be positive 24/3, which would be positive 8. And then on the second side of the equation, I'll have 1/4 of 8c, so 1/4 times 8c, and positive 1/4 times negative 20. Squeeze that in. So that's going to be 2c minus 5. Okay, subtract 2c from each side. 2c plus 8 equals negative 5. And then you can subtract 8 from each side. So 2c equals negative 13. And when you divide by 2, you'll get c equals negative 6.5. All right, next one, we need to write an equation that represents the statement. So we'll start with 2 more than, so that would just be 2 plus, and then it's 4 times the quantity of, so we're going to have 4 times something in parentheses. So the quantity of a number decreased by 5. So we can do n minus 5. And then it says it is equal to 18 less than 4 times the quantity of a number n. So if I want to do 18 less than, I actually need to do 4n minus 18. Okay, if I said 18 less than 20, that would represent 2. I need to switch the order because 18 minus 20 is not 2. So that's why the less than tells us that we need to subtract it after the following term. Okay, now that I've got my equation set up, I can go ahead and solve. So I'm going to start with the distributive property. So 2 plus 4n minus 20 equals 4n minus 8. And then 2 plus negative 20, oops, sorry, 18. 2 plus negative 20, I can combine into negative 18. And then I can subtract 4n from each side. And I end up with negative 18 equals negative 18. So that is a true statement, which means that n is going to equal all real numbers. And that tells us that any value you could think of, any possible number, could be substituted in place of n, and the equation would still work. And so for part C, we can go ahead and say yes, and then we're going to put that explanation into words. And so one possible statement you could say, since the solution to the equation includes all real numbers, which we know because we got a true statement in negative 18 equals negative 18, then any value would satisfy the equation. All right, moving on. A rectangular prism has a volume of 210 cubic centimeters. The height is 10 centimeters. The width is 3 centimeters. Find the length of the prism. We want to do this algebraically since that's our main focus for this unit is being able to set up an equation and solve it. So I'm going to start with my volume equation. And for a rectangular prism, that's going to be length times width times height. And then I'm going to substitute in all of the pieces I know. So volume is 210. And then I have a height of 10 centimeters. So that's going to go underneath H. And I have a width of 3 centimeters. So I'm going to put 3 underneath the W. And then I can fill in equals length times 3 times 10. And then from here, the right-hand side I can simplify to 30L, or 30 times L. And now it's just a one-step equation where we can divide by 30 on each side, and that's going to give us a final length of 7, and our units are going to be centimeters. So final answer, the length would be 7 centimeters. All right, final question. James has a $50 gift certificate for Starbucks. He wants to save at least $12, and he's going to buy a $4 mocha twice a week. First, we're going to define our variable. We want to know how many weeks he can continue this habit until he gets to $12. So I'm going to use W to represent number of weeks. Okay, now we're going to write an inequality. He needs to have at least $12, so that means he could have more than 12 or exactly 12. So I'm going to use the greater than or equal for the second half of my equation. Okay, at least would be greater than or equal to $12. He's buying a $4 mocha twice a week, so that means he's going to be spending $8 per week. And since he's starting with $50 and spending $8 per week, we could use this inequality. 50 minus 8W is greater than or equal to 12. Okay, now we can go ahead and solve that. I can subtract 50 from each side. So we get negative 8w is greater than or equal to negative 38. And then we're going to divide by the coefficient of negative 8. So we get w. Because we divided by a negative, the sign is going to flip to be less than or equal to. And then we're going to divide 38 by 8. When we do that, 8 goes in 4 times with 4 left over. I could do a decimal point. I could write it as a fraction. Either way, I'm going to get 4.5. So w is less than or equal to 4.5. Now we're going to put that in context of the problem. So he could, when we graph this, that means that w could be anything up to 4.5, but since we're talking about weeks, this would be a discrete function, and that means that we're only going to have values that are on our whole numbers. So when I draw my graph, I can have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 would not work, but 4 would work, 3 would work, 2 would work, 1 would work, and 0 would work. None of the negative numbers would work. So final value, w is less than or equal to 4 weeks, and I'm not going to include the half because we're only talking in terms of full weeks since he's buying 2 per week. All right, that concludes your solutions to your review sheet. Be sure that you study, and this time, just to see if you're paying attention, go ahead and put a star next to your first and last name on the front of your review sheet. Thank you.